clarity is not something you start with. It's something you earn through action, through results, through the decisions you make over time. One of the biggest mistakes professionals make, especially early in their careers, is thinking that by clearly stating their job title, their business category, or their industry, they're making themselves understood. They are not, because nobody actually cares what you do. What people care about is whether you're effective, whether you solve problems, whether you make things happen, and that kind of clarity that comes from results, not introductions. You can tell people you're a strategist, a coach, a consultant, an entrepreneur, but unless they've seen you deliver, those words are empty. You're saying a lot without saying anything meaningful. When you lead with titles, you're trying to shortcut clarity. And that shortcut will cost you, because now you've put yourself in a category in someone else's mind, and they're filtering you through their past experiences, their biases, their assumptions. You've lost control of the narrative. And worse, you've diluted your value. The people who get ahead are the ones who lead with outcomes. They don't walk into rooms saying, "Here's what I do." They walk in with energy, with certainty, with results. They don't wait to be understood. They demonstrate who they are through the standards they uphold and the problems they solve. It's not about being mysterious. It's about being intentional. When you don't immediately explain yourself, you give people a reason to lean in, to ask questions, to get curious, and when people are curious, they're engaged. You're creating pull instead of pushing your way into relevance. Think about the last time you were truly impressed by someone. Was it because they gave you a perfect elevator pitch, or was it because they carried themselves with clarity, confidence, and credibility? That's earned. That's not something you can rehearse into being. That's something you build by consistently showing up and doing the hard work, making decisions, taking ownership, saying no when it's not aligned, saying yes when it scares you. But you know it's the next right step. People often want to find the perfect phrase, the one-liner that sums up everything they do and makes them instantly attractive to the right clients, partners, or investors. That line doesn't exist, because who you are in business, in leadership, in life, it's not static. You're constantly evolving. If you tie your identity too tightly to a label, you limit your growth. You lock yourself into a version of success that might not serve you tomorrow. But when you lead with action, when you let your execution speak for you, you're always in alignment with your next level. This is why clarity must be earned. It doesn't come from explaining, it comes from proving. And when you've proven who you are, when your work, your decisions, and your results align, people know. You don't have to over-articulate, you don't have to convince, you show up, you deliver, and the right people recognize it. They feel it. That's how you build trust. That's how you build authority. So stop obsessing over how to package yourself. Stop trying to find the right words to make people take you seriously. Start doing the things that make people take notice without you needing to explain a thing. That's where your power is. That's where your leverage is. Because when you earn clarity, when it's built on real, measurable results, nobody can take that from you. And you never again have to prove yourself with words. You prove it by being exactly who you say you are without ever having to say it. You don't need to announce your value. Your performance will do that for you. The fastest way to lose credibility is to try and convince people of your greatness before you've shown them anything. In business, in leadership, in life, people don't respond to your title or how you frame yourself. They respond to results, to impact, to energy, and all of that comes from what you do, not what you say you do. The people who earn respect walk into a room and let their track record speak louder than their voice. They don't waste time explaining themselves. They focus on creating undeniable proof through execution. That's what makes people pay attention. That's what builds trust, because talk is cheap. Everyone can claim to be an expert. Everyone can make promises. But when you consistently deliver, when your performance backs up your presence, you become someone people listen to, without needing to raise your voice or lead with a resume. The truth is, performance is magnetic. When you're excellent at what you do, people are drawn to it. They want to know how you think. They want to understand how you operate. And more importantly, they want to work with you, collaborate with you, learn from you. You don't have to pitch them. You don't have to justify your rate, your vision, your ideas, because your work already made the introduction. You walked in prepared. You followed through. You made the room better. That's the introduction that actually matters. In forming environments, there is no patience for people who spend more time talking about the work than doing it. Leaders are watching, colleagues are noticing. People remember how you show up. Did you meet the deadline? Did you exceed expectations? Did you lead with clarity when others were spinning in confusion? Did you take ownership or pass responsibility? That's your brand. That's what people say about you when you're not in the room, and no branding agency in the world can fake that. So if you're tempted to impress people with a list of qualifications or a clever job title, pause. Ask yourself, what am I actually known for? When someone finishes working with me, what's their experience? Because that reputation, that's built over time through action. And if your performance isn't aligned with the story you're telling, you're just performing the role of someone successful. That's different than being effective. That's different than being the real deal. Think about the people you admire, the people who command a room without needing to explain themselves. They got there by showing up again and again, doing what they said they would do, and delivering when it counted. Their work introduced them long before their bio did. And when they speak, people listen, not because they have the loudest voice, but because their performance earned them the right to be heard. This doesn't mean you don't communicate. It doesn't mean you stay silent. But it means that your credibility should never rely on what you claim. It should be built on what you've proven. Because when your performance introduces you, you don't have to chase opportunities, you attract them. You create momentum, and you build a foundation of respect that no algorithm, no title, and no amount of networking can replace. This is the difference between noise and signal. A lot of people are making noise, trying to stand out, trying to get attention, trying to be seen. But the signal, that's rare. That's someone who shows up and performs at a level so high, people remember them long after the meeting ends. That's someone who doesn't need to be flashy because their execution is so consistent, it speaks for itself. Be that person, the one who leads with outcomes, who builds trust through action, who understands that performance is the most powerful introduction you'll ever have, and once you've earned that reputation, everything else gets easier. You won't need to chase credibility, you'll carry it with you. Labels feel safe. They give you something to point to when someone asks, "What do you do?" They give you a shortcut, a quick identity to wear in rooms full of strangers. But here's the truth, labels limit you. The moment you define yourself with a fixed title, a job description, or a niche, you start shrinking to fit that container. You reduce your potential down to something other people can easily categorize. And that's not power, that's confinement. You might think calling yourself a manager, a strategist, a designer, or a coach helps you gain credibility, but what it actually does is invite assumptions. It tells people how to think about you, often before they've even experienced your work. They'll compare you to every other manager, every other designer, every other coach they've ever met. And just like that, your uniqueness is gone. You're now operating from inside a box that someone else built, and chances are it's smaller than what you're capable of. Labels are often used to compensate for a lack of clarity. People use them to feel legitimate, to feel understood. But the problem is, once you over-identify with a label, you start operating with invisible boundaries. You start turning down opportunities that don't fit your role. You start avoiding challenges that fall outside the job description. You start believing that the label defines your worth. And if that label gets taken away, if your role changes, if your industry shifts, if your business model breaks, you're left questioning your value. When you stop leading with labels, you make space to lead with value. You start thinking in terms of outcomes instead of roles. Instead of saying, "I'm a project manager," you say, "I bring clarity to chaos and deliver results under pressure." That's a whole different energy. That invites a different conversation, one that isn't about fitting you into a predefined box, but about exploring what you actually bring to the table. High performers know this. They don't obsess over titles, they obsess over impact. They're not interested in fitting in, they're interested in expansion. They evolve as their skills evolve. They say yes to what challenges them and no to what confines them. And because they aren't tied to one rigid identity, they move faster. They adapt, they scale, they stay relevant because they're not clinging to a label. They're constantly rewriting what's possible. This is especially critical if you're in a leadership position. Because when you label yourself too narrowly, your team starts to do the same. They look to you and think, that's the scope, that's the ceiling. But when you lead with flexibility, when you show that your value isn't confined to a title, you give your team permission to do the same. You create a culture that rewards performance, not positioning. There's also a long-term risk to letting labels define you. They become part of your internal identity. You start to believe you can only succeed as long as you stay within the role you've mastered. So when it's time to pivot into a new industry, a new level, a new version of yourself, you resist, you hesitate, not because you can't grow, but because you've confused your label with your worth. That's why letting go of labels is so freeing. It doesn't mean you lack direction. It means you're choosing to lead with capacity, not category. It means you're prioritizing what you can do, not what you call yourself. It's a mindset shift that opens up new levels of creativity, leadership, and growth. You stop playing small, you stop defending your seat at the table because your performance speaks louder than your title ever could. So the next time someone asks, "What do you do?" resist the urge to shrink into a label. Tell them what you create, tell them what you solve, tell them the difference you make, because that's the real story, and it's way too big to fit on a name tag. When you walk into a room and immediately tell people everything about what you do, what you've accomplished, and why they should care, you leave no space for curiosity. You've answered questions no one asked. You've closed the loop before anyone had the chance to engage, and what you think is clarity is actually a conversation killer, because curiosity builds connection, and if you take that away, you take away your greatest tool for creating real relationships. The strongest connections are built on questions, not presentations. People don't connect with information, they connect with interest. When someone leans in and asks, "Wait, what do you mean by that?" or "How did you get into that?" that's where real engagement happens. That's where trust begins, but that only happens if you leave a little room for mystery, a little room for discovery, and most people aren't comfortable with that. They want to fill every silence, explain every detail, control the narrative from the start. But control is not connection, it's performance, and performance rarely invites intimacy. When you hold back just enough, not in a secretive way, but in a grounded, intentional way, you shift the dynamic. You're not trying to prove anything. You're giving the other person space to meet you halfway. You're allowing them to be part of the discovery process. And when people get to discover something about you instead of being told it, the impact is completely different. They remember it, they feel ownership in the interaction, and that's how loyalty and influence are built. Not by being impressive, but by being intriguing. It's also a matter of respect. When you don't assume people need your whole story up front, you're signaling that you value their perspective too. You're creating a two-way exchange instead of a monologue, and the more curious they become, the more invested they are. That's when real conversations happen. That's when people start to reveal more of themselves. And now you're building connection based on trust, not a pitch. This doesn't mean you're being vague or withholding. It means you're letting your presence do the work, you're letting your energy speak, you're letting your results create credibility, so when people ask what you do, you can answer in a way that's layered, nuanced, and opens more doors. Not shuts them. People who lead with curiosity rather than credentials build deeper relationships. Whether you're in business development, leadership, or networking, your goal isn't to impress, it's to connect. You're not trying to be the loudest person in the room. You're trying to be the most memorable, and being memorable isn't about delivering a perfect introduction. It's about creating an emotional imprint. That moment where someone says, "There's something about them. I want to know more." That's how you build a brand people trust. That's how you attract aligned opportunities. When you don't try to front, load every interaction with all your achievements, you give people something to engage with. You give them room to care, and when people care, they commit to the relationship, to the mission, to the work. This applies whether you're pitching an investor, hiring a new team member, or simply building your network. The depth of your connections will be determined by how much space you allow others to feel seen, and that starts with not over-explaining yourself. That starts with showing up confidently without needing to be fully understood in the first 5 minutes. Let people be curious, let them ask, let them connect the dots, because when they do that work, the bond is stronger, the relationship is more real, and the door stays open longer. So stop trying to prove yourself before anyone's even asked who you are. Let the question come, let the silence sit, let your presence lead, because the best connections are never forced. They're earned through curiosity and nurtured by trust. Let that be your strategy, and everything else will follow. Every time you open your mouth to explain what you do, how you do it, or why it matters, you're shaping the narrative people attach to you. The question is, are you in control of that narrative, or are you letting someone else define it for you? Because when you lead with labels, over-explain, or chase clarity too soon, you hand over control. You allow other people's assumptions, experiences, and limitations to shape how they see you, and that's a dangerous place to build from. The narrative you build around yourself isn't just a story, it's your positioning. It determines how people talk about you when you're not in the room, how seriously they take you, and whether or not they believe you're capable of leading at the next level. So if you're not intentional about it, you become reactive, you start correcting people, clarifying things, justifying your role, and once you start explaining too much, you've already lost the frame. The most effective professionals don't lead with explanation, they lead with direction. They show up with clarity about who they are, where they're going, and what they stand for. That doesn't mean they tell everyone their 5-year plan. It means they carry themselves like someone who's already aligned with it. They speak in a way that makes people lean in, not zone out. They don't need to be fully understood in the first 5 minutes because they trust their presence to do the heavy lifting. They've built the internal confidence to let the right people come closer and the wrong people disqualify themselves. This is how you stay in control. You don't try to control other people. You control the energy you bring into a room. You control what you share and what you hold back. You control how you respond when someone mislabels you, underestimates you, or tries to put you in a box. You don't react emotionally. You redirect the conversation. You clarify through action. You don't argue for your value. You demonstrate it. People will always try to make sense of you quickly. That's human nature. But the moment you allow their assumptions to dictate your messaging, you start editing yourself to fit expectations that were never yours in the first place. You start playing smaller to be more relatable. You start softening your goals to make others comfortable, and before you realize it, you're building a version of success that doesn't even belong to you. Control is not about manipulation, it's about ownership. It's about having a standard for how you speak about your work, your mission, your goals, and refusing to water it down just to be accepted faster. When you own your narrative, you don't chase relevance. You set it, you don't follow trends, you create space, and people notice that. They might not understand you right away, but they'll respect you. They'll feel the difference between someone trying to be impressive and someone who knows who they are. This also gives you room to evolve, because when you're not boxed in by a fixed narrative, you can pivot without losing credibility. You can grow without reintroducing yourself every 6 months. You're not locked into a version of yourself that no longer fits. You've positioned yourself around values and outcomes, not just roles and tactics. That's long-term strategy. That's the difference between someone who's successful today and someone who's building a reputation that lasts. So every time you show up, whether it's online in a meeting or at a dinner, ask yourself, am I controlling this narrative or am I reacting to someone else's version of it? Am I showing up with direction or explaining out of insecurity? Because the truth is, people will always have something to say. Let them. You don't owe them your blueprint. You owe yourself your clarity. And when you stay in control of the narrative, you build something no one else can rewrite.